Welcome to today's Daily Explainer Brief. We're jumping right into the nuts and bolts of modern economic warfare in the Middle East and looking at its surprisingly disconnected effect on global financial markets. We're going to dig into the underlying data to see exactly what happens when the theater of conflict moves away from the battlefield and straight into the banking sector. Here's our roadmap for today. We'll quickly cover the Hormuz choke point, unpack Iran's hidden economic crisis, break down the actual math of the blockade, and wrap up with the global market reactions. Okay, let's dive right in. When a geopolitical conflict shifts entirely to an economic blockade, can the targeted economy actually sustain itself? It's a massive question, right? We see all these headlines about military positioning and political posturing, but beneath all of that is a structural financial reality. When an economy is pushed to the absolute brink, how long can the center really hold? Well, the reality on the ground is just staggering. 1.5 million. That is the black market exchange rate of the Iranian rial to his single US dollar right now. It's a shocking metric of internal collapse. When you want to cut through the official propaganda and check the true pulse of an economy, you look at its currency. And frankly, a number like this tells the story of an economy that is structurally failing. Part 1, the Hormuz choke point. Let's look at the physical geography that makes this economic squeeze even possible. What's really wild here is the sheer dominance of the Strait of Hormuz. It's the absolute linchpin handling a massive 95% of Iran's maritime trade. Their oil and petrochemical exports heavily rely on this single waterway. Now, you might be thinking, what about the Caspian Sea as a backup? Well, it handles a mere 5%. The infrastructure there just can't scale up enough to replace Hormuz. It's completely insufficient to keep their economy afloat. And this geographic bottleneck, it allows for a textbook economic blockade. The strategy here is actually fascinating. It's about structurally isolating the target nation while actively ensuring that neutral ships can still pass safely through the region. So it's basically a two-front war, but entirely economic. You choke off the targeted regime's ability to export and grab dollars, pushing them toward the edge, while deliberately protecting global shipping lanes so the rest of the world doesn't feel the pain. Moving on to part 2, Iran's hidden economic crisis. Let's peel back the layers of the regime's messaging and look at the undeniable domestic reality. If we look past the PR campaigns, the qualitative data paints a picture of a deeply fractured domestic economy. We are looking at 12 million people unemployed. That is a shocking 50% of the active working population. Add to that critical shortages of basic medicines and just runaway inflation. Official numbers are heavily massaged, sure, but real inflation is estimated to easily surpass 70%, and honestly, it's likely hovering right near 100%. The gap between the ruling authority and the daily reality of the citizens is widening incredibly fast. But here is the absolute kicker. 34. Public sector workers, who represent half of the entire economic activity in the country, have gone 34 days without a paycheck, and the current promise from the top, they might be paid in another 22 days. Just imagine a modern economy where half the workforce simply stops getting paid for nearly 2 months. This is a giant blinking red light telling us the central authority is simply running out of dollars. And it totally makes sense when you track the currency devaluation. Compare the pre-conflict exchange rate of 42,000 reals to the dollar to today's market rate of 1.5 million. You're looking at a currency whose purchasing power is effectively trending towards zero. The government used to maintain a multi-tier exchange system to kind of hide this, offering different rates for official imports versus the street. But those rates have converged now. The illusion is gone, simply because the dollars are gone. Part 3, the math of the blockade. Let's break down the raw, daily numbers of this economic warfare. Check out this structural damage. They are losing roughly $300 million every single day in oil and petrochemical exports. Now, they've tried to put a Band-Aid on this by heavily restricting imports, cutting back on consumer goods, industrial raw materials, things like that, which saves them about $150 million a day. But do the math. That still leaves an insurmountable net deficit of $150 million a day. It's a massive financial hemorrhage, rapidly draining whatever reserves the country has left. So, because dollars are incredibly scarce, the government is forced to make some brutal choices. The limited capital they do have is funneled directly into these 3 structural and military priorities: buying armaments, constructing missiles and drones, and paying foreign allies. Let's be clear here. Geopolitical allies, like China and Russia, they don't provide assistance out of the goodness of their hearts. They demand hard currency. This strict allocation leaves absolutely nothing for domestic consumer survival, which is exactly why those food and medicine shortages are happening. Finally, Part 4. Global Market Reactions. How is global capital pricing all of this in? You'd probably expect total energy chaos given the region we're talking about, right? Well, the reality is surprisingly different. Look at Brent crude. It hit a firm resistance ceiling right around $103.50. Why didn't it shoot to the moon? Because, like we mentioned earlier, the blockade strategy intentionally allows neutral ships to pass safely through the Strait of Hormuz. By securing the broader global shipping lanes while isolating a single target, the market actually stays incredibly calm. And honestly, we see this calm reflected everywhere else too. Despite all the broader narratives about inflation, the true bedrock of the global financial system, U.S. Treasury yields, is sitting remarkably steady at around 4.3%. The bond market is usually the very first thing to panic during times of global geopolitical stress. But right now, it's signaling a total business-as-usual environment. And this really illustrates the ultimate takeaway. Look at U.S. equity markets. The S&P 500, the Nasdaq, they're completely shrugging off this geopolitical tension and pushing to all-time highs. Institutional capital realizes that this economic warfare is contained, it's devastating the targeted domestic economy for sure, but it has been carefully ring-fenced, so it doesn't bleed out into the global financial ecosystem. So that wraps up today's explainer. But I want to leave you with this provocative thought. As the math of economic warfare literally hollows out entire nations, how long can global portfolios stay totally disconnected from the geopolitical friction boiling just beneath the surface? Right now, the firewall's holding. But as global pressures shift, monitoring that disconnect is absolutely crucial for anyone paying attention to the markets. Thanks so much for joining me today.